And we have another episode of Trump versus the world, but this time the episode is called Trump versus Greenland.
The U.S. was basically going to invade Greenland, but fast forward to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and apparently miracles were done. I'm exaggerating, but it was a surprising and rapidly moving situation after President Trump spoke for well over an hour in front of world leaders, a lot of rich people, and many journalists.
That's right. And first, Trump seemingly took military action off the table. And then in the late hours of Wednesday, he managed to come up with one of his favorite words, and that is a deal, at least a framework of a deal. Now, at the moment, it's just a framework of a deal that would include a renegotiation of a treaty, not a tweet.
Not a tweet, not
between
this time.
the US and Greenland. Not a tweet. I mean, he's famous for them, but it wasn't a tweet this time. But, I mean, it seems like the US president has backed off using another one of his favorite words here. Tariffs.
Yeah, that's right. So tariffs and like a year on of the second Trump administration, there's a lot to talk about because all of this has a really big impact on the U.S. economy.
And a year into the Trump presidency, tariffs have been the name of the game coming out of Washington, even for now, though the weapon of choice has been sheathed when it comes to the EU and NATO and the other countries that balked at Trump's proposed land grab in the Arctic.
Yeah, so Daniel, to talk more about this and how it affects not only the U.S., but the world, because the U.S. being the world's biggest economy, there are ripple effects that really do ripple out across the globe. I called up Mark Blyth. He's the co-author of Inflation, a guide for users and losers. And he's also a professor at Brown University in the U.S. I started off by asking him whether President Trump's tariff threat, at least when it came to Greenland this time around, whether that came as a surprise to him or not.
I was surprised initially. I didn't have either Canada or Greenland on my bingo card about 12 months ago. But if you think about it in terms of the overall security strategy that the United States just announced about a couple of weeks ago, essentially it's hemispheric realignment. China gets to face off against India and run Asia in this imaginary. Europe gets left to fend for itself because you're a bunch of ungrateful whiners that apparently have never paid for anything. And the United States basically lives in splendid isolation from Greenland down to Argentina, running an economy with no windmills and endless amounts of carbon. And that seems to be basically where they want to go. So once you figure out that that's actually quite seriously where they want to end up, yeah, Greenland's there. That's part of the equation. And tariffs are going to be used everywhere, every time to bully people into getting what he wants.
Now, he has seemingly, President Trump, that is backed off from these tariff threats, but put the actual threats into context for us. How are they normally used by other U.S. presidents or by other countries?
Well, they're hardly ever used. I mean, essentially what happened was after World War II, there was so much destruction that everyone in rebuilding got very high growth rates. Everyone basically said, maybe we should get rid of tariffs because we seem to be doing quite well. They did under what was called the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade. Tariffs went down. And then we put that into the WTO in the kind of the high globalization period and kind of constitutionalized it. That annoyed the Americans because they began to lose some cases against Brazil and against India and other places. And then ultimately, when we turned against free trade, the last big free trade agreement was failed to be signed about 12 years ago now, the transatlantic and trans-Pacific partnerships. And we've been staggering along ever since. In terms of using tariffs, Reagan used them very, very sparingly. George Bush did them to win Pennsylvania with steelworkers. But this is a full-throated 19th century, let's rebalance the state by basically taxing foreigners to pay for taxes we won't raise on ourselves. It's a very, very unusual, very 19th century strategy.
And we're talking about tariffs and Trump and Greenland, all in the context of the World Economic Forum in Davos. You said this year marks the death of Davos. It looked pretty alive and glittering to me, but why do you think that?
Because it's basically where CEOs from global companies get together to cosplay as policymakers. If you go back and look at the stuff that they've been talking about, in 2014, they're talking about the fourth industrial revolution and how we're all going to have brain implants and big data is going to transform the world. It's just this like circus that goes on every year. Now, did it serve a purpose at one point? Yes, when the world was multilateralized and still in love with globalization, people could get together and cosplay policymakers. At this point in time, they just got told there's a whole new regime in town. A new sheriff in town is literally how they described it. And you will now basically supplicate. And what you saw was Mark Carney saying, sorry, mate, we don't really want to do that. And you saw some of Europe saying, I'm with Carney, and some others going, I think we'll just supplicate.
But I can hear some listeners saying, Trump did make a framework of a deal with the NATO Secretary General overnight on Wednesday. So it seems like maybe there was some movement. Is policy, I don't know, maybe not happening as often, but occasionally happening at the World Economic Forum in Davos? Like, what's its use, I guess?
In 2 days' time, will that deal be a deal? Do we even know what's in the deal? Europe signed a deal to import over the next 2 years. Last year, they signed this deal, 750 billion worth of American hydrocarbons. They only produce 660 billion in a year. These deals don't make any sense. They're just basically, okay, I've pushed as hard as I can. I'm not actually going to really invade a NATO country. That's a bit hot. Maybe my Joint Chiefs of Staff won't go along with it. So maybe I'll just back off now. But I'll be back, and the tariffs will be back. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will. We don't know. This is the game plan. It is to keep everybody unstable.
I'm wondering why you think Trump decided to back off now. Like, there's one reality where maybe he just did hear what he wanted to hear from politicians and policymakers in Europe. But then there's also, looking at the big market reaction when these threatened tariffs against countries that didn't support his plan from over the weekend, when there was a big market reaction and we saw some stocks dip. Like, why did he back off?
Well, I mean, the stocks dipped by 900 points on the main American index. That's within random volatility for a day. Basically, the market shrugged this off. Why are they doing this? Because they've seen it before. He comes in all vim and vinegar and bluster and says terrible things and unleashes his lieutenants to say even more outrageous things. And everyone gets terribly offended. And then the next day, we're on to something else.
I'm curious because when we back up and look at tariffs outside of this Greenland question, right? The French president refused to join Trump's Board of Peace. Trump said he's going to put a 200% tariff on French wine and champagne. I'm wondering, and I can't help but wonder, and maybe, again, I'm just naive here, why does he continue to threaten his partners like that? And do you think it will be fruitful? It seemed like Macron was playing the tough guy. He had those aviators on this week. What are we doing?
You're not partners. You're a satrap. You're basically part of the empire. You don't supply anything that they desperately need. They need you to buy their oil and gas. You don't provide anything in terms of defense capabilities. Your procurement system means you can't defend for yourself. You're completely dependent on the United States for security, and you're dependent on China for markets and critical imports. So he basically sees you as sort of like useless colonies.
That's a very strong way of putting it. You're right. I'm only producing podcasts over here, so I don't think that's something that the U.S. necessarily needs. But German Chancellor Merz has said France is hit much harder by Germany than Germany by tariffs. Why is that? Do you think that's true as well?
Well, Germany would say that because they don't want to be hit with tariffs, because if they do, then their car industry gets hit. And that's basically the main part of the coalition that drives policy in Germany. So they'd rather French cars get hit than German cars. And this is precisely Europe's problem. They will talk a good game as Europe, but when it comes down to it, they'll try and avoid the tariffs and put it on the other person.
And Merz does seem to have some kind of, I don't know, maybe for the European leaders, like more unique, or maybe it's just newer relationship with Trump. Like Trump had this shout out to the current German chancellor saying he wasn't the reason for the problems in his speech on Wednesday. So how much does the personality or personal relationship between Trump and a leader play into this?
Doesn't matter at all. He will be castigating him 10 days from now for something else.
Yeah, fair enough. It seems like we're changing pretty quickly here. I'm hoping you can give us a bit of a progress report, because we saw a year now of the second Trump administration. And I want to start with the big baddie, at least if you have the Trump White House view, which is China. This time last year, I was running around the studio trying to figure out where we were headed with China. Every month, tariffs were ratcheting up by 10 or more %. But where do we stand right now?
China has rare earth production and refinement for loads of things that are vitally important to the American war machine and domestic industry. They're too big to be pushed around. They have a 500-ship navy. They know that if they ever fought them over Taiwan, it would be at best a stalemate, if not a disaster. So China basically gets cut a deal. This is hemispheric realignment. That's the policy. It's in the national security strategy. You're going to have 3 different big blocks. One is a China block, one's an America block, and whatever happens to Europe block, the rest of the world doesn't feature in it. They will have different tech stacks, different energy stacks, different systems of government. This is an entirely different way of viewing the world, which is much more 19th century than even 20th century. And they're determined to make it happen. Meanwhile, Europe is still thinking that it's holding on to the remnants of multilateralism. Please go listen to Carney's speech. He's exactly right.
Do you see other countries making moves towards independence and reducing their reliance on the United States so far?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Canada has basically tried to do so. China has done so. China has basically rerouted most of its exports, apart from the stuff the United States absolutely has to have. The ones that haven't been able to do so are, once again, the Europeans, because they're dependent on China and America for markets, and particularly America also for security. And increasingly now, because you've basically defunded your own green transition or in the process of doing so, you're more and more dependent on American liquid natural gas exports. So they've got you by fuel, they've got you by security, and when they say jump, you'll jump.
You paint a grim picture.
I don't applaud this. I don't applaud this, but that is the reality of the situation.
And you wrote the book on inflation, quite literally. Make the connection for our audience, because I'm sure supporters of the Trump agenda are going to say tariffs have nothing to do with inflation. But how do you see it?
Well, they haven't shown up yet, have they? I mean, in the textbook, what you do is you say, ceteris paribus, everything remaining equal, but everything doesn't remain equal. When you put a tariff on one country, you move production to another country. When you tariff that country, you then split it up and then do it in 3 different ways and reroute your supply chains. Also, corporations have never been more profitable. Currently, American corporate profits are 12.5% of GDP. Historically, they're 6%. They can eat a lot of this, and the consumer ultimately is paying some of this as well. It's just not showing up in the inflation figures in the way that people expected.
You know, my name's Cassandra, but I'm going to ask you to predict the future a little bit here. What do you think are going to be the lasting effects of tariffs and this current U.S. policy on not only the U.S., but also world economies?
As Carney said yesterday, it's a rupture. And you react to ruptures either through acceptance or denial. Some countries are basically going to try and reduce their dependence, form new alliances, try and contain the damage. And others are going to basically pretend that nothing's happening and it's all noise and we'll all be fine. And I don't think that that second one is a good survival strategy. We're in for a period of extreme disruption. And even right now, we've got another 3 years of the administration to go. It's when you think about how far they've gone in terms of basically banning green investment in the United States, if you think about what they've done in domestic policy in terms of immigration, having basically a police force that can arrest people without cause, that can shoot people in the streets, the occupation of cities, which is something we'd never thought would happen, is already beginning to unfold. It's a very, very different and difficult place.
That was just a sneak peek of our show, The Dip. And if you like what you see, you can scan the QR code appearing on your screen right now, or you can follow us on your favorite podcast platform, or check the YouTube description for a link to find us.
But until next time, thank you very much for watching The Dip.